You've written about blame on non-human objects, so people blame or scold pets maybe for making mistakes, but we can also get angry at objects. I remember this from my childhood quite well. Do you remember those pens? So there were various devices that did it, but they'd be like a joke pen, but where you press down the cap, it would give you an electric shock. So you would like get somebody at school would ask you for a pen and you'd hand them one and then watch as they shock themselves. So I had a pen like that and I brought it to my friend Sam's house and I don't know how I hoodwinked him into using it. I was like, maybe check out my new pen. But he pressed the button and then shouted because it hurt. And then instead of getting mad at me, he just picked it up and then slammed it against the table and broke it in half. And I was so pissed off about it. But I remember even thinking at the time, why the fuck did you break my pen? I was the one who did this to you. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that it is kind of a pressing question. I mean, there's a lot, probably aware of some of this work. There's an explosion in research on like our social judgments in general and artificial intelligences, robots, like those kinds of things. And it's still, to me, an open question as to what's going on when it comes to blame. Anger, I get. So like, I get angry at my computer for not working, or I say I get angry. I mean, I'm angry and the computer is the one that broke. If you ask me, do you blame your computer? I might say yes. This gets back to the issue of measurement, because I've gotten in some arguments with some people who study this stuff. And the question of how we can really assess whether what's going on is blame is an interesting one. So I have a Roomba, right? The Roomba sometimes gets stuck and it persistently gets stuck in the same place. Maybe I get mad. It's supposed to be one of the fancier ones that's mapped out in my house, but it's not doing it. I get mad at it. And you say, like, do you blame your Roomba for messing up? And I might say yes. But obviously, if you ask me a question about agency, I know that Roomba is not really an agent. And same goes for like more complex social robots, like where you might bring people into lab and have a robot. It's often actually a person controlling the robot anyway, or speaking through the robot. But you have a robot break something of yours. You might say you're mad at the robot, but what perplexes me is if hard pressed, you will say that the robot didn't make a choice. And usually that will mean that we don't really think that it's responsible and therefore not really blameworthy. At least when we believe that about humans, it tends to make us think that they're not really responsible. So the argument I've gotten in informally with colleagues is whether or not it's right to say that it's blame. And so they will say to me, look, people are getting angry. They honestly wish that the robot had done otherwise. And they say I blame the robot. Who are we to say that that's not blame? Right? And to which I just say sometimes, well, belief in the agency of the thing seems to me to be such an important part of the concept blame that I think they're just using the word in a different way. Like, I think if I set them aside and I'd be like, okay, let's say there's two kinds of blame. One where you're just like angry at something that's not an agent, and one where it's like deeply agentic. I think at least that they could distinguish between those two. But maybe not. Maybe some people so naturally fall into treating anything that's even mildly agentic seeming that they really are, like whatever mechanism that is giving rise to a judgment of blame is identical in those judgments as they are with like another full-on human being. So to refer to the moral philosophy, like there's philosopher P.F. Strawson, who talked about the reactive attitude. So he said sometimes we just naturally have these ways of treating people morally. And sure, we can turn them off every once in a while, like if I truly believe you didn't have any control. But it's hard, so the argument goes. It's actually a difficult thing to actually suspend those attitudes when we're dealing with human beings. Maybe some people can't suspend them when they're dealing with their car and they kick their car and they really mean that they're blaming the car in every way that you and I mean it when we're blaming a criminal. I don't know. What do you think?
Before I get to what I think, I just want to say one, thanks for distinguishing between blame and anger, because I think that I might have been conflating them when I told you my story about my friend Sam, though I think, to use your word, agentic. I'm not sure if it is a word, but it worked perfectly. I think that pen seemed agentic in the sense that for him in that system one moment, it was that pen that hurt him and it was the pen that was responsible for it.
Absolutely. I think that really happens. Yeah.
But what I think about the issue is you're probably familiar. I don't know how much this term gets bandied about in psychology departments, which is funny because psychology is part of the word, but folk psychology is an important branch of philosophy of mind, though I'm not sure how much active research is ongoing in this area. But for our listeners who aren't familiar with folk psychology, it's the way that everybody, without thinking, sort of thinks about how other people's minds work. We think that people have beliefs and desires and this sort of thing. And it seems to be quite primitive in our brains. There are some people, I think that there's debate about whether people with autism are deficient in certain folk psychological ways, but it seems to be pretty important to us. And I wonder whether we are just naturally predisposed to thinking of things in an agential way because folk psychology is so vital to our cognition. So my dog is not that smart, but when he barks, yeah, when he howls at fire engines, and I want to tell him, like, they're not doing any, they're not going to bother you. We don't need to sound the alarm, but he obviously doesn't understand what I'm saying. But I can't help but look at him and think of him as an agent who has beliefs and should be assuageable and this sort of thing. So I think that's what's happening with robots or other objects. We're just
right. It's interesting because, for biological entities, I think it's not wrong. They're made of the same stuff as us, they just have less of it. And so treating them as goal-directed and having intentions and desires seems so natural. But this all to say, yeah, exactly what you said, like what we perceive as agency in the world around us is we're very promiscuous with those perceptions. And so there's great work, going back into the 50s on perception, that people spontaneously see agency in all kinds of moving objects. And so all you have to do is meet some very small criteria, like things that move on their own without an external force acted upon them. They just pop out as agents, right? They really seem that way. And so maybe that's all you need. So maybe what's going on is that natural process is blame, and then people like me are just adjusting after we feel that way. But yeah, I don't know, because programmed is going to start getting complicated when we get the full language models that are emerging now in this historical time period into robots that can move around, because when we ask them, why did you do that? They're going to give us the full suite of folk psychological explanations, right? And the real answer will just be that they're programmed to do so. But maybe that's just what we are. Right? Like maybe that's exactly what we are. We're fancy robots that are programmed, and we have a full vocabulary of agency that we use for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too speculative here, but you mentioned this work going back to the 1950s on perspective and how we see agency in random places. And I suspect, and I doubt you would even disagree, that the reason that things like dryads or naiads or wind spirits or rain gods or sun gods, all these things crop up in mythology everywhere is because of our tendency to see agency in various places.
I think that some combination, I think here's where the evolutionary psychologists and cognitive psychologists combine forces to really explain why why our minds are so active in seeing supernatural agency in the world around us. And we see faces in clouds all the time, right? It's very easy we have such a dedicated system to see agency that all it takes is like a few things to get it super active. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just going full circle, answering what I think about the pen or our tendency to see or to blame other objects, I think that all of this probably stems from some folk psychological apparatus. But now, unless you have any further thoughts on that matter, can we shift gears to another topic that you've worked a lot on? So
I'm just actually before we go, I'm actually really excited to see what it will be like to have some of those Boston Dynamic robots that are like super good at moving like humans. And then we just give an instance of ChatGPT 4.0 so that they can explain their actions. I think it'll be hard not to start treating them as moral creatures.